The first thing is that you have to be brutally honest with yourself sometimes. And as you said, about what you're really good at and what you're not. And as you said, taking sales management as an example, as you said, the best salespeople don't always make the best sales managers. Oftentimes, the best salespeople, if you ask them what makes them really good, they can't really tell you. They're unconsciously competent. They've built up these things over the year, but they can't. It's what works for them. They can't share it. They can't codify it. They can't really teach it.
This is the Entrepreneurs United podcast with your hosts, John St. Pierre and Rich Hoffman.
Hey, entrepreneurs. Today we're sitting down with John Golden. He's a chief strategist and marketing officer at Pipeliner CRM. John, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, listen, thanks very much.
So you have a long history of sales expertise. You've published a couple of books. You have a magazine. You obviously are a chief strategist and marketing officer now with a CRM product. What has driven you to sales? Where's your passion come from?
It's really like both sales and marketing, because I don't really differentiate that much between the two, particularly anymore. I think they're both highly connected. But I think at the essence is sales is about helping people. I think that's where people sometimes lose that idea. It's about helping people, serving people. It's about connecting people with solutions to their problem or helping them maximize their opportunities. So it's such a pivotal role. And it's one that unfortunately is often shall we say, denigrated in many ways. It's been really put down through popular culture. We think of the sleazy, pushy salespeople. We think of Glenn Ross and all of that. Whereas, to be honest, sales is the tip of the spear. And certainly a pipeliner, we see it as having a huge societal impact, because when people are trading fairly and equitably, there's peace between people. You can't have conflict. And salespeople are the conduit. So in many ways, salespeople have a great role in society in helping to bridge those gaps and keeping people working together. And that's why if countries trade together fairly, then it's unlikely that they'll be at war. So we see it as a very noble profession and one that has been underestimated.
Yeah, the idea of win-lose versus win in
Yeah.
sales is critical, right? When you can create win situations, it can live in harmony for a very long time, including the example you gave with countries. But
Yeah.
those who seek to create a win-lose or pull one over somebody, which unfortunately, John, does happen. There are industries, there are trades, there are people in this world who do that. But those who create true win situations can really prosper long hold. So I love the way that you started with that, because although you do say there is a negative kind of perception with the word sales, as an entrepreneur, I know that none of the businesses I'm involved with can survive without it.
Mhm.
So everybody desperately wants to be successful at it. And yet there's sometimes this outward societal perception. But if an entrepreneur is listening to this, they want it. What are some keys you think as entrepreneurs they should be thinking about when building their sales and marketing strategy? Because that's really where you're a chief strategist now. From a sales and marketing strategy, what should be some major overlying principles?
I think that fundamentally at the beginning is really identifying who your target customer really is. And I think the temptation often is, I've run my own business and that in the past as well. The temptation is at the beginning, especially for entrepreneurs, is that you start to look at everybody as your customer, or you just take anything that comes your way because you want to get some revenue in the door. And so I think that's the most important thing, is really going as granularly as you can down to what your ideal target customer is, and then being disciplined in going after that target customer. And so when you're building pipeline, being very disciplined about what goes into your pipeline, and don't start padding your pipeline to make yourself feel good. I always call it the feel good funnel. Don't do that. Don't put opportunities in so you can make yourself feel good that, okay, I've got lots of opportunities here. But in reality, if I drill down into them, there's not lots of opportunities in there, because a lot of them are maybe not the correct target, or they're a little off to the side. So that's what I would say. The very first thing is invest enough time in being really granular in who your target customer is, and really try and focus on that, and don't be tempted, which is obviously a temptation, to grab anything you can or to go outside of your target customer. That would be my first piece of advice: is get very granular, get very targeted.
Yeah, and when you think about it, this is something I've learned as of recently. When you talk about the marketing side of things,
Hmm.
the world's a pretty big place.
Yep.
And you have all these social media platforms, you have all these media outlets, you have all these whatever is out there to publicize what you do. If you're trying to hit everybody, you don't have enough money to hit everybody. Therefore, you
Yep.
hit nobody. And so the,
Yep.
the, the concept that I had heard that really connected with me is the riches are in the niches. And the only way to
Yes.
know what your niche is to know exactly who your buyer persona is. And
Hmm.
if we talk about that just for a second, I'm sure from a strategy and marketing perspective, the clearer you can be about that target customer or that buyer persona, the better your marketing spend is. The higher your
Yeah.
success ratio is, the more money you can put into stuff because the ROI, right, the customer acquisition cost goes down. Can you tell me a little bit more maybe about how you would recommend entrepreneurs if they haven't identified exactly that target customer, what process they should take to do that? And then talk to me a little bit more about customer acquisition cost and the importance of that, because that speaks to all the stuff you just talked about.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to identifying your target customer, I think that the first thing to do is to look, okay, what your product or service is, and ideally, in the most ideal situation, the optimum outcome that you can have, and then work back from that and say, look at who is the optimum person or persons in order to sell that to. And so I think the first thing to do is to go through that exercise of looking at what do you do yourself? What do you do best? What do you do better than anybody else? And then who benefits from the first of those two? So what do you do? What do you do best? What do you do better than anyone else? And who is the ideal person for that? And I think once you align the two, what you do best, then it becomes relatively easy to figure out who you do it for. And then just narrow that down. And again, then you next part is to look at what is your ability to deliver to that target, because you may come up with somebody, you may come up with a few different personas, but you may discover that one persona is more difficult. You don't really have the resources. Maybe it's a little bit a bit bigger customer and you're only starting out. You don't have the resources to deliver to that. So maybe you need to focus on the smaller to medium sized companies. So I think you've got to look at your capacity to deliver. And the other thing too, especially for entrepreneurs and small businesses, is you have to be able to balance your continually to be prospecting and to be delivering at the same time, especially for service industries and stuff. That can be difficult,
Mhm.
or solopreneurs or consultants or coaches or things like that. Is you can have your feast or famine bit, right? Where you do a lot of prospecting, you get some customers, but now you're distracted so much into delivering on that is that your prospecting goes to the side. So then once you've delivered something, you got to get back to prospecting because now you've got nothing in your pipeline. So it's all of those things. I think it is balancing your ability to deliver, your ability to balance prospecting with delivering on whatever product or service you're offering.
Yeah, I've really personally have been focused in working with entrepreneurs and in my own
Mhm.
businesses more and more on the concept of customer acquisition cost and
Mhm.
long-term value of a customer.
Yep.
And it's a very simple formula. I like to just explore it with you because I don't think a lot of entrepreneurs think about it this way. And I remember sitting down with Jared Antista. He runs a digital marketing company called IOI Ventures. And I sat down with him about 10 years ago and he was looking to do some work with our business. And I said, hey, excuse me, give me $1,000. I'll turn it into 3,000. Because he did digital marketing and he's one of the best that I've known at that business. But when he said it to me, I was like, listen, Jerry, you're going to turn every $1,000 I give you into 3,000. I got an unlimited amount of $1,000
Yeah.
that I can go get. But I don't find that we track and calculate how much it costs to acquire a customer. So let's say the $1,000 to acquire the customer and the
Mhm.
$3,000 I'm going to get, or the $30,000 I'm going to get, or the $300,000 I'm going to get, or whatever the dollar amount is, the long term value of that customer versus the cost. And once you have that formula figured out, that's how you can actually go to investors or even pump more of your own money into the business
Yep.
to know that if I put $10,000 in, I'm going to get 10x the result or $100,000 and so on and so forth. So how do you suggest entrepreneurs and businesses track that kind of stuff and measure that? Is that what Sales Pipeliner can help you with as well as a sideline
Uh,
question?
yes, it can, but yeah, I would say absolutely track that. There's the formulas. Make sure that you understand, and I think that's a good point that you raise here because sometimes when People start businesses, they're not financial experts, they're not SaaS metrics. If you're in SaaS metrics, if it's a SaaS business, they're not experts in that. So those are things you have to learn, and you have to learn about what are the inputs. And as I said, there are formulas to do that. You put your sales cost in, you put your marketing costs in, everything to calculate your customer acquisition cost. One thing I would always, though, encourage people is to look out for the hidden costs. But because what I used to say is, I often used to use this analogy is, what destroys more homes in the US every year? What destroys the most homes? And most people will say, is it fire? And you go, no. Or is it flood, wind? No, it's termites, right? And termites aren't overnight, right? Termites are there. It could be there for years and years, and then one day your house falls down. I liken that to hidden costs in your business, and that's where you have to be really disciplined and make sure that you're attributing all of the costs properly. And therefore, every extra time you spend on something, or if you get somebody else to help you or whatever, you need to calculate all of that in, because otherwise you're fooling yourself a little bit about how much is really costing you to acquire a customer. So calculating your customer acquisition cost is very important. The other part that you mentioned earlier about the win, because lifetime value is what you really want at the end of the day, because you don't want one-off or project based. If you want repeat customers, you want people coming back, you want people referring you. If you don't set up a win from the get-go, you might get that person once. If you do your I win, you lose, you get that person once. They're not going to obviously do business with you in the future, probably. So I would pay a lot of attention to how you develop the relationship from the get-go. And then the important thing is that everybody in your organization, even if it's only two or three of you, understands that actually you're all in sales, because maybe I sold it to you, maybe you're doing the delivery, maybe somebody else is doing the support. All of those are part of the buyer experience. And therefore, if everybody isn't aligned, if everybody isn't delivering the same level of service in the same way, then you can undermine that. So the first thing I would do is make sure you calculate all of your costs related to acquiring the customer. And as I said, there are formulas for doing that, but be disciplined about it and make sure you calculate in every cost and not exclude ones that maybe seem a little more random. And then, as we said, set up your win situations with your customers so that they will stay with you or repeat or they will refer. And then make sure everybody involved in your business understands that anytime they touch a customer, whether it's digitally or whether it's in person, whether it's over the phone, whatever, that you're also contributing to that lifetime value of the customer, because the customer is going to stay with you or repeat business with you or refer you if they're having a consistently good experience.
Mm. Yeah, to the point we're talking about now, and you just said refer people to you. Your customer acquisition cost goes down quite a bit when
Goes
people are
down
referring
hugely,
you.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I want to touch on this hidden costs component just to make sure I understand, because you brought that up a few times. It's very easy to say, I spent X amount on Google ads, or I spent X amount
Yeah.
on the hard costs. When you say hidden costs, what immediately comes to mind is the cost of people,
Yeah.
meaning I have people that work in marketing and sales, but maybe they also do some other things in the business. And how do I prorate that amount? Any tips or tricks on how to make sure you're capturing all the costs? And before you answer that, I also have a secondary question, which
Yeah.
is, do you calculate your CAC in your business, your customer acquisition cost, based on a period of time? In other words, all of these people and hard costs over a quarter minus how many new customers we got in a quarter is our customer acquisition cost for a quarter. Do you do it on a monthly basis, quarter, year? Like, how would you get all the math together?
Yeah, it really depends. You can do it on a monthly basis if you're set up that way and you have somebody who can help you maybe do that. So you have all of the data. I would certainly do it on a quarterly basis if you can't do it on a monthly basis, or if you don't need to do it on a monthly basis, but certainly on a quarterly basis, and keep an eye on that. And then as allocations go, you don't have to be 100% accurate on that. Just make sure that you allocate sufficient, because like I said, if you have somebody in your business who helps maybe onboard somebody, but they do a bunch of other things, helping somebody get up and running and supporting them, that's an acquisition cost still. So just allocate some of that. I mean, you don't have to, I would never advocate for getting so granular that you can't actually, you're not doing anything else because you're
Yep,
spending your whole time
sure.
crunching numbers. But just be reasonable in it. And most people can figure out, okay, this X amount of time is going towards this, therefore the costs should go in there. But like you said, the more efficient you become, the better your acquisition costs get.
Yeah. Okay. Love that. So if we talk to the salespeople or sales managers, a lot of entrepreneurs are the salesperson at first
Mhm.
and then become the sales manager. And as we all know, your best salesperson isn't your best sales manager. So the entrepreneur sometimes is not the best sales manager, even though they were the best salesperson of their own product or service. What do you say in terms of I'm an entrepreneur, I have a business? What are some of the do's and don'ts in your mind of building the right team for sales and marketing, like the entire infrastructure? What are some important elements to ensure that you're building the right culture, the right team, the right management, the right metrics, the right everything to manage your group?
I think the first thing is that you have to be brutally honest with yourself sometimes, and as you said about what you're really good at and what you're not. And as you said, taking sales management as an example, as you said, the best salespeople don't always make the best sales managers. Oftentimes, the best salespeople, if you ask them what makes them really good, they can't really tell you. They're unconsciously competent. They've built up these things over the year, but they can't. It's what works for them. They can't share it. They can't codify it. They can't really teach it. And I think that's a key point. I think what you need to do is if you know that you're not a good sales manager, you're not going to be a good sales manager, you're too maybe consumed in sales, you're too much of a closer, then you need to go out and find somebody who's going to complement you, right? And somebody who's going to be able to do the things that you can't do. So somebody who's going to be able to maybe build and tweak your sales process. Somebody who's going to be very good at coaching and mentoring in early stage opportunities, and somebody who's going to be able to, hopefully as your business grows, recruit and train and mentor those people coming through. So I think it takes a lot of soul searching and some humility to say, okay, maybe this is my business, I created it, I can sell better than anybody else, but that's not what I need to do right now. There are other things in the business that I need to focus on, or I need to be a part-time salesperson, but I really need to hand the reins over to somebody else to really organize this and make it scalable for the future, because hopefully your business grows. And then go out and recruit that person. And then the next part is the hardest part, is where if somebody is getting the result, then you have to let them do it their way.
Hmm.
And their way may not be your way.
Ooh.
And that, I think, is the hardest part of
Yeah.
anything. And that's not even just for entrepreneurs, that's for anybody who delegates or whatever. Sometimes is you have to be prepared for somebody to do things slightly differently than you did it, or maybe radically differently than you did it. But as long as they're getting the results and things are working smoothly, that should be okay with you.
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of times, especially when you bring in new sales management, it's like, here's the way we're going to do things now.
Yeah.
And people are having success, they revolt that. If
Mhm.
there's one thing that people don't like is change.
Mhm.
And if they're doing something successfully and someone's going to move their cheese,
Yeah.
that can create some systematic problems. One thing I've had a hard time with in my experience, just a quick side note, back in 2005, one of the companies I still own today was looking for something to manage our CRM.
Right.
And I found salesforce.com, and it was like, set up for a free trial of salesforce.com. So I've set up for a free trial. We've been on the system for 20 some years now. So I'm like in this system, I know it pretty
Mhm.
well. But the one thing I always struggled with is getting our team to manage and track the data. And I'm not just talking about sales, I'm talking about marketing, I'm talking about operations, just having
Mhm.
that real data analytics to the process using a proper CRM. Can you provide some feedback on how you recommend managing that, and maybe even how Sales Pipeliner helps with that process? Because if it's too complicated, they won't use it.
Yeah, no, that is the reality of it. Is unfortunately traditional CRM like Salesforce and that were built originally from a management perspective. It really are command and control systems, but they were really built for somebody, or built for management, as I said, for getting all of this data for management. What was missing from the equation was, where's the data coming from? Who are the people who are going to be using the system? When they're the salespeople, right? And so CRM came synonymous with, for salespeople, with, oh, great data entry and cumbersome systems. And if I had a dollar back in the day for every salesperson who I said, update the CRM, and they said, turn around to me and said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to update the CRM, or do you want me to
So
sell?
I heard that before.
And you'd say, ideally both. sales, but acknowledging the fact that the systems were not set up for salespeople. Let's be honest about it. They were set up for sales management, executive management, and salespeople were an afterthought. You put in this. That's why with Pipeliner CRM, we built it from a salesperson first perspective. So it made it very visual, very extremely visual, extremely easy to use. And with built in with now we have AI and intelligent systems in there. So it gives something back to the salesperson. And I think that's the key is if your system isn't actually benefiting the salespeople by putting in the data, right? Or also now with automation tools and that, like we've an automation tool in our system, you can automate a ton of the rote and routine data entry that you once upon a time would have had to burden on the salespeople. So you can have them focus on more high value activities. But like I said, the key to it is showing salespeople how the system can benefit them. So it's the quid pro quo. So if I engage with the system, if I put the data in, oh, it actually feeds me some intelligent insights back. It's showing me which of the opportunities I should focus on. Oh, look, here's this current customer, their health score is turning negative. I better get on that. So all of these things, if it's perceived as helping them, they'll use it. If it's perceived as just being a conduit to get data from executive management, then they won't use it. It's pretty, to be honest, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's very well put, and you're right. I mean, I chuckled because the amount of times I heard that. Do you want me to manage the put this in the system, or you want me to make some more calls? That was my response as well. Both. I don't
Yeah.
know what's going on, but how to automate things to make your life easier. I guess that's part of. I love you talking about incorporating other tools and AI in it because one of the things I think that happens to entrepreneurs is we get overwhelmed
Hmm.
by the tech stack a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a tool for this, there's a tool for that, there's a tool for that. I've actually had entrepreneurs tell me, similar to the sales example, look, do you want me to go run my business? Do you want me to change software platforms again? Go over here and do
Right.
that. So there's a cost, there's an investment cost, right? To
Hmm.
finding the right platform for your business to be managed on. Do you have some advice for entrepreneurs in that realm in terms of what they should be looking for and how they should plan for a new system setup or a transfer of it from one system to another? Any tidbits on that part?
Yeah, I think first of all, back to your first point about overwhelmed by tech stack, I do think that there is a danger nowadays because there's so many shiny new toys out there that I think you have to be disciplined and say, okay, I need this tool for this specific reason right now. Maybe some of the other ones are nice to have, they're interesting, but right now I can't either afford them or I don't have the time to integrate them into the business and use them properly. I guarantee you there's some people out there listening are probably going, oh, yeah, I've got three or four tools that I signed up for that I don't use anymore because
Yep.
I never really had the opportunity to do. But so I would say narrow it down to what's important right now and maybe one tool at a time. And then make sure that if you're going to bring a tool into the business, say you're going to bring a CRM into the business, involve the people who are going to be using the system in the decision making process, in the review process, and then in the rollout process, right? And then start off with, and I just think in any implementation of any tool is start off with what are the quick wins you can get. So what are some of the things that your folks can do using the tool that can give quick wins? Don't try and roll out everything at once and overwhelm people by saying we're going to do these really intense boot camps and we're going to train you on the whole system. I would say do your training incrementally, but start off with where the high value parts of the system are and get those working first and get people used to using them first and then start to roll out and maybe adopt other features. So I would take a very narrow and incremental approach, like focus on the tool that you need most right now and then roll that out incrementally. And the other thing too is in most organizations, whoever's using the system is going to take their cue from whoever they work for. So whether they work for the owner or whether they work for the sales manager, if the sales manager is not using the CRM to do to do their reviews, or if they're not in the system themselves, you're going to go, okay, this doesn't really matter. So it's really important that everybody in the organization is aligned and using whatever tool it is and are seen to be using that tool. And therefore, everybody understands, okay, this is the tool that we've coalesced around.
That's such an incredible piece of feedback there, which is a lot of times The entrepreneur gets really excited about a tool.
Hmm.
They move forward with it. They then go to implement it and they're pushing it to the
Yep.
organization. Okay, we're now doing this, right?
Hmm.
And the eyes roll back in the head and so here we go, another shiny object. There's a new thing. It's probably going to be gone in 2 months. And so no one
Yep.
buys in.
Hmm.
Versus the opposite, which is putting together a focus group of somebody from marketing, somebody from sales, somebody from operations saying, hey, we have this issue. Let's look at some tools. This team, you go look at this team, let's bring it back. The team kind of coalesces behind one tool. Yeah, we need this. This is what we need to be more efficient. And then the entrepreneur, as a servant leader of the organization, goes and implements the tool with everybody's buy in. Two
Yep.
totally different approaches. And by the way, I've done both, and there's a big difference between the buy in on one way and the buy in on the others. That's for sure.
Yeah. And the other part too is to, we all have networks, we all know people, is go out and find other people who maybe are using the same tool or have the same problem, and ask them how they solved it. And there's so many, and there's groups and there's review sites you can go to, and just you do a little bit of do some research before you decide on a tool. And like I said, is get the people involved in it and get the feedback, get the ownership from the get-go.
Yeah, love that. John, you also authored a couple of books. I want to ask a question about one of them. The title intrigued me, Winning the Battle for Sales. If you had to sum up maybe a high level learning from that book relative to everything we talked about today or different from what we talked about today, what was that book about and why do you feel that people should maybe take a look?
The book is basically about selling techniques, but using the analogies of famous battles and some obscure ones of military history. What I did was take incidences from history and relate them to a sales lesson. And in that way, hoping to have people do that kind of remembering by association. So there's a lot of different ones, but I always use CRM. The one before I was involved in the CRM industry, I used it in the David and Goliath analogy, is that most people don't know the full story, but when before David was about to go out or whatever, like the king offered him the latest, greatest armor and all these sword and all this kind of stuff, and he put it on and that, and then he was like, "This is too heavy. It's not going to work for me. I'm not mobile. I'm going to forget." So he ditched all that and went out with the sling, and off you go and knocked the old giant out. But my point was always, it's the right tool you need. It's not always the newest tool. It's not the shiny tool. It's not whatever. It's the one that works for the situation. And that's just one of the analogies there, is to make sure the tool fits the task
Yep.
rather than the shiny new toy. And then just in general, the whole book has, every chapter is a different battle, or we do it's like the Battle of Iskanwala, the Zulus against the British, where they use this, I can't remember what it's called exactly, but it's like a bullhorn where they put their fastest people on the flanks and their most experienced in the middle, and the British couldn't cope with it. But it also, that's an idea again of putting the right resources in the right place. So maybe in sales, this is often a thing in sales, like maybe you're a fantastic door opener, but you're not that great once the door's open, right?
Oh
You're
yeah.
not that great a process person. And then maybe I'm a great relationship builder. Once the door's open, I'm in there doing all of this. So there's a great opportunity. Maybe I have two people in my organizations. Maybe I team them as opposed to having them both as individual
Ooh,
salespeople,
yeah.
and one doing one part good and another one part two. Is team them. Now you've got the best of both worlds. You got a great door opener and you got a great closer.
Yeah, and you said something along the lines earlier too, which is don't try and change people if they're successful at something. And way too many times I've done this. Hey, they're very good at networking, getting a door open, so let's make them a full-time sales representative, and then they don't succeed. Or a
Yeah.
full-time sales representative who can close anything, but doesn't like to make the calls, and you try and make them make the calls. Next thing you know, you've lost the person. So playing to people's strengths is a critical component of building the right team for sure.
Yeah, we have this awful habit, and I know it's hardwired into us as humans, is where we're fantastic at figuring out what you're not doing good, and focusing in on that. Do you remember if you worked in companies and you had that god awful performance review, right?
Yeah.
And the performance review always went something like this. Oh, here's a couple of things you've done really well this year, and here's 52 things to work on. And
Yeah.
you're like, great, thank you. That's wonderful. And that's how we're hardwired. When we should be looking at things differently, we should be looking at what are your strengths and what do you do really well? Because at the end of the day, what you like and what you're good at and what you do well, obviously is you're going to get the best out of you. But if I try to focus in on the things that you don't do so well and try and force you to get better at those, ultimately that's not going to be very successful, because maybe you're just never going to be good at that. Maybe you're never going to like doing that part, and so you're never really going to commit to it. So you're far better off is looking at people's strengths and working on how can I leverage those strengths, how can I maximize those strengths for the business. And in that way then you have happier employees and you have a higher performing business. But too often we're trying to fix things that, to be honest, maybe can't be fixed and maybe don't need to be fixed.
Yeah, love it. John, how can people get more, learn more, connect with you?
Yeah, you can connect me on LinkedIn, John Golden, pretty easy to find. And then if you want to check out Pipeliner CRM, it's pipelinersales.com, and salespop.net or Salespop YouTube channel, where I have my Salespop podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Stay tuned as John and Rich unpack today's conversation.
That was a first for me, and maybe for you as well, operating this podcast today without my co-host Rich Hoffman, who's on summer vacation this week, and we want to keep the episodes going. I'm sure there'll be some episodes in the near future with Rich as well, with me not here in copies. To break down this episode by myself is a little more difficult, but I have a question to ask all entrepreneurs who just listened to that conversation is, do you know your customer acquisition cost? I bet that most entrepreneurs listening to that question right now do not know their customer acquisition costs. As we talked to John Golden about, trying to calculate that on a quarterly basis. So how much have you put in to sales and marketing in the last quarter? Think about your sales reps, your marketing team, your marketing spend, maybe travel, maybe trade shows, whatever you do to generate sales and marketing. Don't forget all those hidden costs, divided by how many new customers did you acquire in the last quarter. That would be your customer acquisition cost. It's an incredibly important number to know, because then you got to look at your lifetime value of a customer. That one's a little more easy to calculate, which is how much revenue have you generated from a certain customer life to date. Now, some customers may have signed up with your product or service and they no longer use it. Some of them may be monthly recurring customers that have been with you for 5 years plus. It doesn't matter. Calculate each customer you have in your accounting software. What's the lifetime value or average lifetime value you've gotten from all of your customers? Once you have your lifetime value and your customer acquisition cost, you can determine how much is your lifetime value minus your customer acquisition cost, right? That's how much margin you make every time you bring on a new customer. You can start doing some analysis to say, are you spending too much or not enough on acquiring customers? And maybe on the adverse side, are you keeping customers around long enough? Or is your pricing strategy right? Are you getting the right lifetime value from a customer on the other side? So knowing those two numbers are critical to your sales and marketing success. Hopefully this podcast was helpful for you today. Look forward to seeing you again next week.